David Thompson checked his watch as he stood by the main entrance of the concert hall. 10:47 p.m. Another 13 minutes until his shift ended. He'd been doing this job for 3 years now, and most nights felt exactly the same. People walked past him like he was part of the furniture. Sometimes they'd nod. Mostly they didn't. At 52 years old, David had gotten used to being invisible. The navy blue uniform, the security badge, the same polite smile he gave everyone who entered the building. Nobody really looked at him. Nobody asked questions. And that was fine. That's how he wanted it. But every single night, after the last concert ended and the audience filed out into the cold evening air, David would do something he probably shouldn't. He'd walk down the main aisle of the empty hall, past rows and rows of velvet seats, and just stand there, staring at the stage, staring at the grand piano that sat there under a single spotlight. His fingers would start moving without him even thinking about it, little twitches and movements, like they were remembering something his mind tried hard to forget. Sometimes he'd catch himself doing it and shove his hands deep into his pockets, but the memory never quite went away. You see, David had a secret, a big one, the kind of secret that felt heavier with each passing year. 25 years ago, he wasn't a security guard. He was a pianist. Not just any pianist either. He'd studied at one of the best music schools in the country. He'd won competitions. He'd performed in front of thousands of people. Critics said he had magic in his fingers. They said he could make a piano sing in ways that brought grown men to tears. But life has a funny way of changing your plans. His wife, Catherine, got sick. Really sick. The kind of sick that requires specialists and treatments and medications that cost more money than a struggling musician could ever make. So David made a choice. He packed away his dreams into a box, hung up his performance clothes, and found a job with steady pay and health insurance. That was 25 years ago. Catherine was better now, thank God. But the years had passed and the dream felt further away than ever. How do you go back to something after so long? How do you explain a 25-year gap to anyone? You don't. You just keep your head down and do your job. The concert hall where David worked wasn't just any venue. The Riverside Concert Hall was one of those fancy places where ticket prices started at $200 and went up from there. Crystal chandeliers, red velvet curtains, gold trim on everything. The kind of place where famous musicians from around the world came to perform. David had watched hundreds of pianists grace that stage. Some were brilliant. Some were just okay. But every single time someone sat down at that piano, something inside David's chest would tighten. He'd stand at his post perfectly still, perfectly professional, while his heart screamed that it should be him up there. 3 months ago, everything changed when the hall hired a new head of security. His name was Robert Grant, and he was nothing like the previous boss. Robert was ex-military, the kind of guy who believed in strict rules and clear hierarchies. Everything had to be done exactly his way, no exceptions. Robert made it clear from day one that he ran a tight ship. Guards couldn't be late, not even by a minute. Uniforms had to be spotless. You couldn't chat with coworkers during shifts. You definitely couldn't use your phone. And under no circumstances were you allowed to touch anything in the venue that wasn't part of your job. David didn't mind most of the rules. He'd always been professional anyway, but Robert seemed to have a special interest in making sure everyone stayed in their lane. He'd walk around during shifts, watching everyone like a hawk, just waiting for someone to step out of line. One evening, about 2 months into Robert's tenure, David made a mistake. It was after closing time, and he thought he was alone. He'd walked onto the stage just like he did sometimes, but this time he got a little closer to the piano. His hand reached out, and his fingers just barely touched the keys. He didn't even press down. Just touched them. "What do you think you're doing?" David jumped back like he'd been electrocuted. Robert was standing in the shadows near the stage entrance, arms crossed, face hard as stone. "I'm sorry, sir. I was just what? Just touching a $3 million instrument that you have no business being near?" Robert walked closer, his footsteps echoing in the empty hall. "Do you have any idea how much that piano is worth?" "More than you'll make in 10 years. "Yes, sir. I apologize. It won't happen again." Robert stared at him for a long moment. "See that it doesn't. You're here to provide security, Thompson, not to play make-believe." David felt his face burn with shame. He nodded and quickly left the stage, walking past Robert without making eye contact. That night he didn't sleep well. The words, "play make-believe," kept echoing in his head. But things got worse. A few days later, Robert overheard two of the ushers talking during their break. David was in the next room organizing his equipment when he heard his name mentioned. "Did you know Thompson used to be a musician?" One of them said. "Really? Our Thompson? The quiet security guy?" "Yeah, I heard he went to some fancy music school. Played piano or something. My cousin knows someone who saw him perform years ago." David felt his stomach drop. He didn't know how they'd found out. Maybe someone from his past had recognized him. Maybe word just got around. Small world and all that. But then he heard Robert's voice, sharp and cold. Thompson was a musician? There was something in his tone that David didn't like. Something mean. The next morning, Robert called an emergency meeting for all security staff. Everyone gathered in the break room, confused about what was going on. Robert stood at the front, arms crossed, wearing that same hard expression he always had. "I want to make something crystal clear," he began. "I've been hearing rumors about some staff members who think they're more than what they are. People who think that because they work in a concert hall, they're somehow connected to the art." David felt eyes glancing his way. His face started to get hot. "Let me tell you something," Robert continued. "We have roles here. The musicians are musicians. The staff are staff. Security is security. And those roles don't mix, ever." He paused, then looked directly at David. "If I ever catch anyone on my team, especially Thompson here, touching that piano like they own the place, like they're some kind of artist, they're done. Fired. On the spot. No warnings. No second chances. I don't care what you think you were 20 years ago. You're security now, and that's all you are." The room was completely silent. David could feel everyone looking at him. Could feel the humiliation spreading through his body like hot poison. He wanted to disappear. He wanted to defend himself, to say something, anything. But what could he say? Robert was his boss. This was his job. His livelihood, so he just nodded, looking down at his hands. Those same hands that used to bring concert halls to their feet with standing ovations. Those same hands that once knew every complex piece of music ever written. Now they were just the hands of a man who'd been put firmly in his place. Robert dismissed the meeting, and everyone filed out quietly. David went back to his post, standing by the entrance like always, wearing his uniform like always, being invisible like always. But something had shifted inside him. The humiliation stung deeper than anything had in years. And as he stood there watching people come and go, he wondered if maybe Robert was right. Maybe he was just fooling himself. Maybe those dreams were dead and gone. Maybe it was time to stop staring at that piano and just accept reality. He had no idea that in just a few days, everything in his carefully controlled, invisible life was about to explode in ways he never could have imagined. Friday evening arrived with the kind of chaos that made everyone at the concert hall nervous. David had been assigned to backstage security for the night, which was unusual. Normally, he worked the front entrance, but Robert had shuffled assignments around at the last minute. Something about wanting fresh eyes in different positions. David didn't mind. Actually, he preferred it back here. Away from the crowds. Away from Robert's constant supervision. Just him and the quiet hum of pre-show preparations. But this wasn't just any show. Tonight was the annual gala fundraiser, the biggest event of the entire season. The kind of night that could make or break the concert hall's funding for the next year. Tickets had sold out 6 months in advance at $500 each. The mayor was coming. Several city council members, wealthy donors who could write checks with more zeros than David made in a year. And the star of the evening was Victor Novak, one of the most celebrated pianists in the world. The guy had played for presidents and kings. He'd won every major award you could win. When his team had confirmed the booking 8 months ago, the hall's director had literally cried tears of joy. David stood near the backstage entrance, watching the controlled chaos unfold around him. Stage managers rushed back and forth with clipboards. Sound technicians tested microphones. The lighting crew made final adjustments. Everyone moved with purpose, with urgency. This had to be perfect. He caught glimpses of Victor Novak through the open dressing room door. The pianist was older than David had expected, maybe mid-60s, with silver hair and an elegant suit that probably cost more than David's car. Even from a distance, you could see the man carried himself differently, like someone who'd spent his entire life being treated as important. David felt that familiar ache in his chest, the one that never quite went away. That could have been his life, should have been maybe, But he pushed the thought down, like always, and focused on his job. Jennifer Cole, the show coordinator, rushed past him for the third time in 10 minutes. She was a nervous wreck, which wasn't unusual for big events, but tonight she seemed especially stressed. Her phone kept ringing. She kept checking her watch. David had worked enough of these events to know when something was off. 30 minutes to curtain, someone announced over the backstage intercom. The energy shifted. That pre-show electricity that David had felt 1,000 times before. In the old days, this is when his hands would start sweating, when his heart would beat just a little faster, when he'd run through the pieces one more time in his head, making sure every note was locked in. Now he just stood there, watching other people experience that feeling. 25 minutes to curtain. David heard raised voices coming from Victor's dressing room. He tensed, his security training kicking in. Voices getting louder usually meant problems, and problems on show night were never good. Jennifer rushed toward the dressing room and David instinctively followed, staying a respectful distance back but close enough to help if needed. When Jennifer opened the door, David could see Victor sitting in a chair looking pale. Really pale. The kind of pale that made your stomach drop because you knew something was very wrong. "Get the paramedics," Jennifer shouted, and suddenly everything went from controlled chaos to actual chaos. David radioed for help immediately. Within 2 minutes, paramedics were rushing backstage with their equipment. David helped clear a path, moved curious onlookers back, did his job. But his mind was racing because he knew what this meant. No Victor meant no show. And no show meant disaster. The paramedics worked quickly. David heard fragments of conversation. Something about an allergic reaction. Something Victor had eaten. His throat was swelling. They needed to get him to a hospital immediately. Jennifer stood frozen, her phone clutched in her hand, watching as they loaded Victor onto a stretcher. The color had drained from her face. She looked like she might pass out herself. 15 minutes to curtain, the intercom announced, oblivious to the crisis unfolding backstage. Robert showed up then, moving through the chaos like a general assessing a battlefield. "What's the situation?" he demanded. "Victor can't perform," Jennifer said, her voice shaking. "He's having a severe allergic reaction. They're taking him to the emergency room. Can he perform after treatment?" "No, absolutely not. Even if the swelling goes down, he won't be in any condition to play tonight." Robert's jaw clenched. "We have 800 guests out there. The mayor, the entire donor list. We cannot cancel this show. What choice do we have?" Jennifer's voice cracked. "We don't have another pianist." She pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking as she started scrolling through contacts. "I'm calling everyone I know. Someone has to be available." David watched her make call after call, each one ending the same way. "No, sorry, already booked. Out of town. Can't make it on such short notice." It was Friday evening. Every professional musician in the city was either already performing somewhere or impossible to reach. The director of the hall, Patricia Winters, arrived backstage. She was a composed woman in her 60s who normally exuded calm authority, but right now she looked terrified. "Tell me we have a solution," she said. Jennifer shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "I've called 17 pianists. Nobody's available. Nobody." "If we cancel, we lose everything," Patricia said quietly. "The donors will pull out. The grants won't be renewed. We might have to close the hall." David felt his heart pounding. He knew what he was about to do was crazy. Absolutely insane. It could ruin everything. Robert had made his position crystal clear just days ago. But he also knew something else. He knew every single piece on tonight's program. He'd studied Chopin's nocturnes when he was 19. He'd performed Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 at his graduation recital. Debussy's Clair de Lune was the piece he'd played the night he proposed to Catherine. These weren't just songs to him. They were memories. They were part of his DNA. His hands were already moving, fingers twitching through the familiar patterns. 25 years since he'd played professionally, but muscle memory was a powerful thing. He could feel it. He could still do this. 10 minutes to curtain. Jennifer was openly crying now. Patricia had her hand over her mouth, clearly trying to figure out how to walk onto that stage and tell 800 people that the show was canceled. David took a breath. His whole body was shaking. This was it. The moment that would either change everything or destroy the little stability he'd built over the past 3 years. He stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said quietly. Nobody heard him. They were too caught up in the crisis. "Excuse me," he said louder. Jennifer looked up, annoyed. "David, not now. We're in the middle of, I can play the program." The words hung in the air like something physical. Everyone stopped. Jennifer stared at him like he'd just spoken in a foreign language. "What did you say?" "I can play tonight's program, all of it. I know every piece." Patricia turned to look at him fully for the first time. "David, this isn't a time for jokes." "I'm not joking, ma'am. I studied at Berklee College of Music. I was a concert pianist for 7 years before I came here. I know every piece Victor was supposed to perform tonight." "I can do this." Jennifer's eyes went wide. "You're serious? You can actually play at that level?" "Yes, ma'am." But before Patricia could respond, Robert's voice cut through the conversation like a knife. "Absolutely not." Everyone turned to look at the head of security. His face was red, his eyes blazing with anger. "Thompson, I don't know what kind of stunt you think you're pulling." "But it's not a stunt," David interrupted, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "I can save this show. You're a security guard. You stand by doors and check badges. That's what you do. That's all you do." "Robert, we have no choice," Patricia said urgently. "If he can actually play, he can't. This is delusional. This is exactly what I warned everyone about." Robert stepped closer to David, his voice dropping to a threatening growl. "I told you what would happen if you touched that piano. I told you. You walk out on that stage, and the second you come back, you're finished. Fired. Done. I will personally escort you out of this building." The backstage had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching this confrontation unfold. Patricia looked at David. "Can you really do this?" "The truth, David. Can you actually perform at the level required tonight?" David thought about his wife at home, about the bills that needed paying, about the health insurance they couldn't afford to lose, about the safe, stable life he'd built. Then he thought about the music that had been locked away inside him for 25 years. The music that still lived in his fingers and his heart in every breath he took. "Yes," he said. "I can do this." Robert's laugh was cruel. "Then you just ended your career. I hope it's worth it." 5 minutes to curtain. Patricia made her decision. "David, you're performing tonight. Get ready." And just like that, everything changed. David's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He stood backstage, staring down at his navy blue security uniform, and for a moment the reality of what he'd just agreed to hit him like a truck. What was he thinking? 25 years. It had been 25 years since he'd played in front of an audience. Jennifer grabbed his arm. "We need to get you presentable. At least take off the security belt and badge." He unclipped his duty belt with trembling fingers. The weight of it had become so familiar over the past 3 years that without it, he felt naked, exposed. He unpinned his badge and handed it to Jennifer, who quickly passed it to an assistant. "There's no time to find proper concert clothes," Patricia said, looking him up and down. "You'll have to go out there as you are." Robert stood against the wall, arms crossed, his face twisted into something between rage and satisfaction. "This is going to be a disaster," he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "A complete embarrassment." David tried to ignore him, but the words dug into his confidence like hooks. What if Robert was right? What if 25 years was too long? What if his fingers didn't remember? What if he froze out there in front of 800 people? 2 minutes, someone called out. Patricia gripped David's shoulder. "Listen to me. I'm taking a huge risk on you. We all are. Don't make me regret this." The pressure of her words made his chest tighten. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Jennifer was already walking toward the stage entrance. "I'll make the announcement. Just wait for my cue, then walk out there with confidence. Like you belong." Like he belonged. David almost laughed. He was a security guard about to perform for the city's elite in his work uniform. Nothing about this said he belonged. He could hear the murmur of the audience beyond the curtain. 800 people. 800 people who'd paid good money expecting a world-class performance from Victor Novak. What would they think when they saw him walk out instead? His heart hammered so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. He wiped his sweaty palms on his pants and tried to remember how to breathe. Then Jennifer's voice came through the speakers, clear and professional despite the crisis that had just unfolded. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your patience this evening. I'm afraid I have some unfortunate news. Due to an unexpected medical emergency, Mr. Victor Novak is unable to perform tonight. The audience erupted in disappointed murmurs. David could hear the shock, the confusion, the beginning of anger. Jennifer continued quickly. However, we are incredibly fortunate to have a replacement performer. Tonight's program will be presented by David Thompson. There was a pause. A terrible, heavy pause. David knew what they were thinking. David who? Nobody had ever heard of him. Of course they hadn't. His performing career had ended before most of these people even knew this concert hall existed. Please welcome Mr. Thompson to the stage. This was it. No turning back now. David stepped through the curtain and into the blinding stage lights. The walk to the piano felt like it took forever. He could feel every single pair of eyes on him. Could hear the confused whispers rippling through the crowd. Who is that? Is he wearing a security uniform? This is who's replacing Victor Novak. I paid $500 for this? Someone near the front actually laughed. Not a mean laugh exactly, but the kind of nervous laugh people make when they think something must be a joke. David reached the piano and stood there for a moment, looking out at the sea of faces. The lights were bright, but he could still see them. Expensive suits and elegant dresses. Jewelry that probably cost more than his annual salary. These were people who knew music. People who'd seen the best performers in the world. And here he was. A 52-year-old security guard who hadn't performed publicly in a quarter century. He sat down on the bench. Adjusted his position. The Steinway was beautiful, even more beautiful up close. He'd walked past this piano 1,000 times, but he'd never actually sat at it before. His fingers hovered over the keys. They were still shaking. From the wings, he could see Robert watching. That smug expression on his face, just waiting for David to fail, waiting to say, "I told you so," waiting to fire him the moment he walked off this stage. David closed his eyes and took a deep breath, and then something shifted inside him. All the noise in his head, all the doubt, all the fear, it started to fade. Because underneath all of that, underneath 25 years of pushing it down and pretending it didn't exist, the music was still there. It had always been there. His fingers found the keys. He began with Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, No. 2. The first notes floated out into the hall, soft and delicate. Like whispers in the dark, like secrets being shared, the audience fell silent. Completely silent. David's fingers moved across the keys, and it was like coming home. Like finding a part of himself he'd thought was dead. The muscle memory was still there, every bit of it. His hands knew exactly where to go, exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly how to make each note sing. The whispers stopped. The skeptical looks faded. People stopped checking their phones. They just listened. 25 years melted away. David wasn't a security guard anymore. He wasn't standing at doors, checking bags, being invisible. He was a musician again. He was an artist. He was doing what he was born to do. The nocturne built slowly, gently, each phrase flowing into the next like water. David could feel the emotion in every note. Not just the technical precision, but the heart of it, the soul. That's what separated good pianists from great ones. Anyone could hit the right keys in the right order. But making people feel something? That was the gift. That was the magic. He finished the nocturne and transitioned immediately into Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. This was different, powerful, dramatic. His fingers raced across the keys with a speed and precision that surprised even him. The piano thundered under his hands, filling every corner of that massive hall with sound. People in the front row actually gasped. In the wings, Jennifer had tears streaming down her face. Patricia stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth in shock. Even the stage crew had stopped working to watch. And Robert. Robert's arms had slowly uncrossed. The smug expression was gone. His face had gone pale. He was watching David with an expression that looked almost like fear. Like he was seeing something impossible. Like everything he thought he knew about the world had just been turned upside down. David poured everything into the Rachmaninoff. Every frustration from the past 25 years. Every dream he'd buried. Every time someone had looked through him like he wasn't there. Every moment he'd stood by that stage wishing it was him up there. It all came out through his fingers, through the keys, through the music. The piece built to a crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. David's hands flew across the piano, barely touching the keys before moving to the next position. This was the part that separated amateurs from professionals. The part that required not just skill but complete mastery. And he nailed it. Every single note, perfect. The audience was mesmerized. You could see it in their faces. They'd come expecting one thing and gotten something completely different, something they couldn't quite believe. David moved into Debussy's Clair de Lune for the final piece. This one was personal. This was the piece he'd played the night he proposed to Catherine, the night his whole life changed, the night he thought all his dreams were coming true. His fingers moved gently across the keys, drawing out every ounce of emotion the piece had to offer. Clair de Lune was about moonlight, about beauty, about moments that take your breath away, and David played it like a man who understood exactly what those moments felt like, because he was living one right now. The final notes hung in the air like a prayer, like magic, like something precious and fragile that might disappear if you breathed too hard. David lifted his hands from the keys. The last chord faded into silence. For one long, terrible moment, nothing happened. The hall was completely quiet. David sat there, his heart pounding, wondering if he'd somehow messed it up. If despite everything it hadn't been enough. And then the audience exploded. 800 people rose to their feet as one. The applause was deafening. It crashed over David like a wave, drowning out every doubt, every fear, every negative thought. People were cheering. Actually cheering. Some were crying. The mayor was on his feet, clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. David stood up slowly, still not quite believing what had just happened. He looked out at the standing ovation, at all those faces that had been skeptical just minutes ago, now filled with joy and amazement. He'd done it. After 25 years, he'd proven that the music never really left. It was always there, waiting for the right moment to come back. Backstage, Robert stood alone, his face unreadable, watching the guard he'd threatened to fire receive the kind of applause most musicians only dream about. And David knew, standing there in his security uniform while 800 people celebrated him, that nothing would ever be the same again. The applause went on forever. 7 minutes of continuous standing ovation. David stood on that stage, tears running down his face, unable to move. His legs felt like jelly. His hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from pure, overwhelming emotion. He'd forgotten what this felt like, to be seen, to be heard, to have people recognize the gift inside you instead of just looking past you like your furniture. Patricia rushed onto the stage, her own eyes red from crying. She hugged him right there in front of everyone. "That was extraordinary," she whispered in his ear. "Absolutely extraordinary." When David finally walked off stage, he was immediately surrounded. People he'd never spoken to before suddenly wanted to shake his hand. Jennifer was sobbing, telling everyone who would listen that she'd discovered him. Stage crew members who'd walked past him for 3 years now looked at him like he was a completely different person. Because he was, in a way. Or maybe he was finally the person he'd always been, just hidden under a uniform and years of quiet resignation. The mayor pushed through the small crowd backstage. "Mr. Thompson!" That was remarkable, truly remarkable. I had no idea we had such talent right here in our own city. David shook his hand, still trying to process everything. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. We'll have to talk about you performing at more city events. I'm serious. That kind of talent shouldn't be hidden away." More people kept coming. Wealthy donors who wanted to know where he'd trained, where he'd performed before, why they'd never heard of him. David answered as best he could, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept looking around, searching for one specific person, Robert. He finally spotted him standing in the far corner of the backstage area, away from all the celebration. Their eyes met across the room. Robert's face was pale, his expression complicated. He looked like a man who'd just watched his entire worldview crumble. The crowd around David kept growing. Someone handed him a bottle of water. Someone else was taking pictures. Patricia was already on her phone, and from the snippets David could hear, she was calling board members, telling them what had just happened. "He saved the entire gala," she was saying. "No, you don't understand. He was perfect. Better than perfect. We need to talk about his future here immediately." His future here. David's heart skipped. What did that mean? But before he could think about it too much, he saw Robert moving toward the exit. Something in David's chest pulled tight. He excused himself from the crowd and followed. He caught up with Robert in the back hallway, away from all the noise and celebration. The head of security had stopped walking and was just standing there staring at the wall. Robert, David said quietly. Robert turned around slowly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. David could see something working behind the other man's eyes. Some kind of internal struggle. Then Robert did something David never expected. He extended his hand. "I was wrong about you," Robert said, his voice rough. "Completely wrong." David stared at the offered hand, then slowly shook it. "I spent 23 years in the military," Robert continued. "I was taught that everyone has a place, a role, and that people should stay in their roles. It's how things work, how order is maintained." He paused, his jaw tight. "But tonight you showed me something I didn't want to see, that people are more than their uniforms, more than their titles. And I was wrong to try to keep you in a box." "Robert, let me finish, please." Robert took a breath. "I embarrassed you at that staff meeting. I threatened you. I mocked something that clearly meant everything to you. And I did it because I was scared. Scared that if people started stepping outside their roles, everything would fall apart. Scared that I'd lose control. Scared that maybe I'd spent my whole life following rules that didn't actually matter." He looked directly at David. "You have a gift, a real gift. And I tried to crush it because it made me uncomfortable. That was wrong. I'm sorry." David felt his throat tighten. Of all the things he'd expected tonight, this wasn't one of them. "I appreciate you saying that," David managed. "More than you know." "I meant what I said, though," Robert added. "About the consequences. I did tell you what would happen if you touched that piano." David's stomach dropped. Right, he'd been fired. In all the excitement, he'd almost forgotten. The applause, the celebration, none of it mattered if he'd just lost his job. Lost his insurance. Lost everything stable in his life. "I understand," David said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I knew the risk when I made the choice." Robert nodded slowly. "You did. And that took real courage." He pulled something from his pocket. "David's security badge. Which is why I'm not going to enforce what I said. You're not fired, Thompson. You earned the right to stay if you want to. If he wanted to." David took the badge, but somehow holding it felt strange now. Like putting on clothes that didn't fit anymore. Before he could respond, Patricia appeared in the hallway, slightly out of breath from running. "There you are." "David, I need to talk to you. Right now." She led him to a quiet office and closed the door. Her eyes were bright with excitement. "I just got off the phone with 3 board members. We want to offer you a position." "A position?" "Artist in residence. You'd perform regular concerts here. Real concerts advertised and ticketed. You'd also teach master classes for young musicians and help with our community outreach program. The salary would be significantly more than security work. Full benefits, of course, pension, everything." David sat down heavily in the nearest chair. His mind was spinning. "I don't understand. A few hours ago, I was a security guard who'd never played publicly in 25 years. Now you're offering me a second chance," Patricia finished. "Look, what you did tonight was remarkable. But it was more than just the performance. You saved this event, you saved our funding, and you proved that sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones we overlook every single day." She sat down across from him. "The board wants to move fast on this. News is already spreading. Jennifer put a short clip on social media and it's already getting thousands of views. By tomorrow morning, everyone's going to be talking about the security guard who stunned the Riverside Concert Hall. We want you locked in before other venues start making offers." "Other venues?" "David, you're about to become famous. Whether you're ready for it or not, famous." The word felt unreal. David thought about his wife at home, waiting to hear how his shift went. He thought about the past 25 years of standing by doors, being invisible, convincing himself that his dreams were dead. "Can I think about it?" he asked. Patricia smiled. "You have until Monday." "But David, don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't come around twice." She left him alone in the office. David sat there in the quiet, still wearing his security uniform, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 2 hours. His phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. "How's work, honey? Quiet night?" He almost laughed. Quiet night. If only she knew. He was about to reply when there was a soft knock on the door. Jennifer poked her head in. "Sorry to bother you, but there are some reporters here. They want to interview you. And there's a line of people from the audience waiting to meet you. And someone from the local news station wants to know if you'll come on their morning show tomorrow." David's head spun. "Morning show? I know it's a lot. But David, what you did tonight was special. People want to know your story. They want to know how a security guard became a virtuoso pianist. They want to know why you stopped performing and how it felt to come back after so long. She paused. You don't have to talk to anyone if you don't want to. But I think people deserve to hear your story, because it's not just about music. It's about dreams that don't die, even when we try to bury them. It's about being more than what people see on the surface. That's a story worth sharing. David stood up slowly. Through the door, he could hear the murmur of voices. People waiting for him. People who wanted to talk to him, not because they needed security, but because they'd seen his gift. He looked down at the security badge in his hand one more time. Then he set it carefully on the desk. Okay, he said. Let's go talk to them. Jennifer's face lit up. Really? Really? But first I need to call my wife. She's not going to believe any of this. As he pulled out his phone, David caught his reflection in the office window. Same uniform, same face. But somehow everything was different. The invisible man had finally been seen, and this was only the beginning. Outside the office, people were waiting. Not for a security guard. Not for someone to check their bags or stand by the door. They were waiting for David Thompson, the pianist. The artist. The man who'd reminded everyone that it's never too late to reclaim the person you were always meant to be. And somewhere in the building, Robert stood alone, thinking about roles and rules and what it means to really see people. He'd learned something tonight, too. Something he'd carry with him for the rest of his life. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is get out of someone's way and let them shine. 3 months later, David stood in the wings of the Riverside Concert Hall, wearing an actual tuxedo this time. Not a security uniform, not borrowed clothes. His own tuxedo tailored to fit him perfectly. He still wasn't quite used to it.